Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Robinson Run. I'm your host, Brady Crytzer. I'm a historian of the American frontier, and I'm focusing on one singular community in this project in the first American West during the American Revolutionary period. Now, whenever you hear the term American West, you're probably thinking of maybe the Rocky Mountains or the Sierra Nevadas, the Cascades. I'm talking about the first West, the West of the American Revolution. In this case, we're in western Pennsylvania, just outside of Pittsburgh. Now, we're studying one single community here in the West, situated along a single 4-mile creek called Robinson Run. And it's an amazing group of people. If you want to learn more about them, I'd encourage you to watch the introductory video to this project. But this is what we call a micro history. And we try to glean whatever information we can from just a small collection of people. And I think the results are going to be really surprising and hopefully change the way we think about the American Revolution. In this episode, we're going to look at the land itself. What is Robinson Run? Where is it? And why do people settle here? And I think when you do that, you get a much better understanding of the maybe push and pull factors that drew them into place. So as you can see on the screen, let's talk first about who these people are in a very broad sense. We're talking about a group of people that are entirely what we would consider to be Scots Irish. Now, some people call these the Ulster Scots, and some people call these Irish Presbyterians. For what it's worth, here, at least in the Pennsylvania frontier, most of them just called themselves Irish. But these were an interesting people. In Europe, they were very much, I think, a second class of citizen. They lived in what is today Northern Ireland. And they were really kind of a people caught in between. The majority of the population was Catholic, but the Anglican minority was really the powers that were in control. And the Scots Irish were caught in the middle. They were landless tenant farmers. They worked the land themselves, but they did not own it. And it was made clear to them that they never could. So that was one of the primary push factors, I guess, that took them out of the old world and brought them into the new. The simplest, most easiest explanation for why they came here was one word, 4 letters. You guessed it, L-A-N-D, land. Owning land would immediately make them the most successful people in the history of their families, and it was a risk that they were willing to take to do that. Because when you owned your own land and owned your own property, you found the secret, the key to unlocking generational wealth, something you could pass on to your children and their children and so on. That was really a privilege only enjoyed by the aristocracy in England and Ireland and Scotland. And it was something that was very real here in America in the 1750s and 1760s. So you can see from the image we have here, this is a painting by David Wright, an amazing, wonderful frontier artist. The Scots Irish moved in groups that looked just like this. They moved in large family units. They were a prolific people. And in a lot of ways, they were almost nomadic, if you wanted to say that about them, especially in the 18th century. They moved in enormous groups of men, women, and children, extended families, and communities on the whole. And they were always seeking a place to settle. Now, we're going to see 2 primary pockets of settlement as far as Robinson Run is concerned, where these people come from. And if you saw episode 2, when we talked about the Reverend John Cuthbertson, we'll see a number of these Robinson Run families actually be transplants from Lancaster County, particularly Octorara Township outside of Lancaster. They picked up and moved as one. But we're also going to see a community in later episodes come from Cecil County, Maryland, particularly the town of Calora, Maryland. And we'll get more into that when we talk about the James Ewing family initially. But what I want you to understand in this section is that these people move in groups, and they move in family and community units, and they usually move in waves. So why were they settling here in Robinson Run, especially here in western Pennsylvania? Well, let's take a look. To understand the draw of western Pennsylvania, the first American West, as it were, you have to know a little bit about the politics going on with the people that already lived here. So what you see on this screen right now is a list of all the major land purchases by the colony of Pennsylvania and later the United States from Native Americans who lived here. And the one we're concerned with is this big, huge yellow area that's labeled as the new purchase. Because for us, this is actually what we call the Treaty of Fort Stanwix. Now, the Treaty of Fort Stanwix was not located in Pennsylvania. That should be your first clue that something's amiss here. But it was actually located in upstate New York, central New York. And this was a deal brokered between the colony of Pennsylvania, the crown, as it were, and the Iroquois Confederacy, the Haudenosaunee people. The Iroquois lived and reigned in upstate New York, but they at least nominally possessed and controlled what is today western Pennsylvania, western Virginia, all the way really down to Kentucky in the Ohio River Valley. It was an area that Britain recognized as, at least in some way, being possessed by the Iroquois, but it was also an area that the Iroquois didn't really control on the ground because they had a number of peoples, if you want to call them this subject peoples, they would disagree with that. But the British recognized Iroquois hegemony or control over them. The Ohio River Valley was a place of the Shawnee. It was a place of the Lenni Lenape. It was a place of the Mingo peoples, later sometimes the Wyandot peoples, even the Cherokees at times. But what you need to know is in 1763, 1764, and beyond, for Scots Irish settlers or any European settlers to move into the Ohio River Valley was a very dangerous and very scary proposition because it was a contested land. It was believed to be native land, despite the fact that the British Empire effectively won the territory at the end of the French and Indian War in 1763. In 1763, the British Empire conquered the French, and the French immediately pulled out of this region. But the native peoples who lived here did not agree to those terms, and we subsequently saw an extended period of Native American war, known as colloquially as Pontiac's Rebellion. I take some umbrage with that name because Pontiac lived in the Great Lakes, and there were a lot of different native groups fighting for their own reasons aside from the Ottawa chief Pontiac. But in 1768, the Crown decided to lay the matter to rest in terms of settlement of the Ohio River Valley. And they signed the Treaty of Fort Stanwix. And the Iroquois ceded the land you see there in yellow to the British Empire. And that was effectively what opened this region for settlement for peoples like the communities here at Robinson Run. Problem we have here is that the Iroquois never really asked or considered the needs of the natives who, actually lived in this region. And because of that, the natives, like the Shawnee especially, saw the Treaty of Fort Stanwix, again, what you see there in yellow, 1768, as null and void. They saw it as completely illegitimate, and that's going to cause major problems when settlers from the English world, so to speak, the British world, begin to populate this area. But it all begins in 1768, the Treaty of Fort Stanwix, when legally, officially, the land becomes available for settlement. Was it actually available? That's a little bit of point of contention depending who you ask, but I want everyone here to understand that. You can't understand the Robinson Run community without understanding that treaty. Now, I have an image here on the screen that I think is really beneficial for understanding the people of Robinson Run and putting them in context. So what you're seeing here is a collection primarily of immigration in the middle part of the 18th century. And you can see that dark orange color is the Scots Irish. Now, I want you to understand there are waves of settlement that the Scots Irish will see from the old world to the new. But primarily, in fact, more than 50%, 50% of Scots Irish settlers who come to the New World will settle in Pennsylvania. Some settle in Maryland, some settle in Virginia, some settle in North Carolina and South Carolina. But Pennsylvania is responsible for 50% of Scots Irish settlers at the time. And remember, these are a people who want to live with their own kind. These are a very insular people. They're not anti-government, but they do like to handle their own business. And the best way they see to do that is by, again, living close to one another. Now, if you take a look at this map and you look at the darkest and largest areas of it, no surprise, you're going to see Western Pennsylvania as the king, as it were, or maybe the queen, depending who you ask. This is where everyone's living. And again, notice in Western Pennsylvania where that's happening. It is not in northwestern Pennsylvania. Okay, you can see it's predominantly the southwestern corner of the modern state, because this is the area that became available from the Treaty of Fort Stanwix in 1768. Now, at the time, this area will be generally known as Washington County, when a lot of these settlers first move around the time of the American Revolution. And you could very easily say that southwestern Pennsylvania, Washington County, was really the epicenter of Scots Irish life in the New World. The most Scots Irish were in Pennsylvania. Of them, the majority in western Pennsylvania, and of them, the majority in Washington County. Now, when we talk about and analyze Robinson Run, you're going to see that Robinson Run, although today part of Allegheny County, in the Revolution was still part of Washington County. So we're going to give all credit, again, in terms of to the counties, to Washington County at the time. It'll be no surprise that events like later the Whiskey Rebellion are going to occur in this same region because it's so predominantly controlled by one group of people. But this is the origin of our Robinson Run community, and it's really what we want to focus on. Alrighty. When the Scots Irish left Europe, remember, they left a very tumultuous place with a lot of political unrest. And I hate to break it to them. It would really kind of spoil it for them, but they weren't moving to an area that was much better. So what you're seeing on the screen now is the border or the boundary between the colony of Pennsylvania and the colony of Maryland. And we really want to focus on these two red lines that bisect the image. The northern one says, quote, Maryland claim, and the southern one says Pennsylvania claim. The Maryland-Pennsylvania border, like a lot of colonial borders, and this won't be the last, was under dispute for most of the colonial period. If you happen to live somewhere between these two red lines, with Lancaster on the northern end and the Chesapeake Bay on the southern end, life was very uncertain for you. You were probably a Scots Irish or German farmer trying to do your best to survive. And when it came time to pay taxes, you were in for a rude awakening, because the colony of Pennsylvania would tax you, and you'd pay it. And then a few days later, the colony of Maryland would tax you, and you had no choice but to pay that. If you didn't pay your taxes, you'd see officials from each colony showing up asking for what they believed was due to them. This area was always contentious, and as it turns out, this band of contention is where most of the Scots Irish immigrants are going to live. And certainly most of our, and I could probably say all, of our Robinson Run subjects are going to live. For those that lived in Lancaster County today, Pennsylvania, there were people saying they were technically in Maryland. And for those living in Cecil County, Maryland, particularly the Ewing family, they were being told that they lived in Pennsylvania. You can see how this gets to be very messy. There's even something of a military conflict that emerges in the early part of the 18th century called Cresap's War, where partisans from Pennsylvania and Maryland will actually duke it out. And if you want to know how they settled this, and you guys probably know this already, this is really the impetus for the Mason and Dixon expedition. And the Mason and Dixon line, as it is called, will take just a few years to survey. It's really one of the great mathematical achievements in all of American history, probably the most impressive scientific achievement, certainly in colonial American history. But Mason and Dixon will survey a perfect border between Pennsylvania and Maryland that will put this conflict to rest in 1767. But what we really care about, and what I want you to know, is the Robinson Run community, the community that will establish itself in the West, left the British Isles because of political turmoil and uncertainty. They came to the New World, and what did they find? More political turmoil and uncertainty. And this is very much kind of the Scots Irish story in the New World. They were looking for a place to call their own, and they had to travel all over to find it. Western Pennsylvania, with the signing of the Treaty of Fort Stanwix, that new available open land they hoped was going to be their destination. Unfortunately for them, we have some more bad news. And you can see it in the far western corner of Pennsylvania. Up until the American Revolution, throughout the 1760s and 1770s, western Pennsylvania, the Ohio River Valley, was actually claimed by both the colony of Pennsylvania and the colony of Virginia. And this was not going to be much better of a situation. You can see the perfect claim there on the map. Virginia had claimed western Pennsylvania, today western Pennsylvania, really in some way since the 1750s. The official colonial charter of Virginia said they owned everything, quote, from sea to sea. As that must be nice. So that was their legal standing. So they interpreted that very broadly to include western Pennsylvania, the state of Kentucky, and even parts of Ohio as well. When settlers first move here, and you will see this later on in the series, most of them purchase land not from the colony of Pennsylvania, but from the colony of Virginia. And we're actually going to see in this program an original land deed signed by a Virginia colonial representative. So most of the people that moved to Robinson Run are technically settling in Virginia, sanctioned by Virginia, and sponsored by Virginia, not Pennsylvania. And this sort of pseudo conflict will turn into something of a civil war, really up until the American Revolution. The Virginians are situated in Pittsburgh and points south. The Pennsylvanians are situated more in Westmoreland County and points north. But it'll get to the point where they start actually arresting each other in the name of their own colonies. Fort Pitt in Pittsburgh, established in 1758, will be renamed Fort Dunmore after John Murray, the 4th Earl of Dunmore, the colonial governor of Virginia. It will get to be very messy. But once again, for these Scots Irish trying to stake a claim to their own world, they're nothing but political turmoil and conflict. And that is very much the world in which the Robinson Run community is born. And I really want to make that clear for you when we see these boundary lines. Here's a closer look at how Virginia really designated and divided western Pennsylvania up. You're looking at the district of West Augusta, as they called it. And they divided into 3 counties, as you can see there. They were very serious about possessing this landscape. And if you look very closely in that light blue section, you will see the very region of Robinson Run. It's located south of the Ohio River, which is that northern boundary, and west of the Chartiers Creek, which comes south out of it. So this is the world they're in, and it's really critical for understanding what we're about to talk about. But let's get to Robinson Run itself finally. This is a modern map of Collier Township, North Fayette Township, and South Fayette Township in Allegheny County, western Pennsylvania. And this is the essential limit of Robinson Run. Now, the blue line you see on the map is not Robinson Run proper. It's just north of it, I mean a few feet, but it's actually what's called Noblestown Road today in the modern parlance. It begins here in the left-hand side of the screen, which is marked B, the red dot, which is Oakdale, Pennsylvania. And it continues eastward about 4.5 miles to what's marked A, which is the beginning of Carnegie, Pennsylvania. It really ends at roughly what is today Interstate 79. And if you look right above my big talking head, Interstate 79 is running north to south. This is a small area, but I want to stress from this area, you will get more than 24 Revolutionary War veterans and a number of participants in not only that, but the 7 Years' War and the Whiskey Rebellion as well. It's an amazingly historic place. I would argue as historic as any 4-mile creek in America. So that's what makes me so excited about telling you about it and researching it over the next several months. But this is Robinson Run. And you can see in the modern sense kind of what the land looks like. It's still, even though it's in Allegheny County, the county seat being Pittsburgh, a very urban area, it's still very rural and very wild. And that's one of the things that really captivates me about it is that you can still see a lot of remnants from the 18th century that you may not expect. Again, this is a river valley filled with people with names like McMichaels, Walker, Ewing, Glass, Brackenridge, and others. And if you travel down that road today, it takes about 10 minutes total, maybe a little more. I don't drive that fast. You're going to see a lot of those same names still there. You'll go through communities like Oakdale, Rennerdale, Ewingsville. That should tip us off to the fact that they're still around. And you'll see these names still there. Walker's Mills is another one. So we'll take a look at that more closely. But what we're concerned about is not so much the modern era. And if you want to drive Noblestown Road, I would encourage you to do it, especially when you're studying and learning about this topic, because it'll really put things in perspective for you. Sometimes history just stands up and smacks you in the face. And this is one of those places where it does. But the great historical resource that we're going to use in our series is not a modern map, but this map. This is an original land warrant from the 1780s. And what I have delineated in blue, you can tell that's not original, is the course of Robinson Run itself. Now, what I love about this map is that it shows the names of all the landowners who live on this 4-mile stretch. And it basically shadows modern Noblestown Road. So if you're going to travel this and you want to learn about it, this is the place to do it. Starting on the left-hand side, the far eastern edge, we have land owned by a man named Hugh Henry Brackenridge, and we'll talk a lot about him someday. And he is sort of the outlier in the Robinson Run area. He's an attorney. He's very erudite. He's very urban. He lives in downtown Pittsburgh. He's an incredibly prolific writer. One of actually the great fiction writers and satirists of really all of early American history. He's an incredible guy. Probably worthy of his own book someday. And I do hope to write that at some point. Not to tip my hand too much. As you continue along the Blue Creek to where the creek kind of makes an M shape, that is going to be the land of Gabriel Walker, and he calls that Richland. And that's going to be the site of one of the really horrific massacres and moments in not only the history of Robinson Run, but really in the history of the entire American Revolution. So stay tuned for that. Continue as the river bends south. You get to the land of his brother Isaac Walker, and he has great names for this land. Part of it he calls Dragon. Again, every land parcel had to have a name. And he will establish himself a mill on that property. We'll talk a lot about Isaac as time goes on. And as you can continue all the way west, you see property labeled as being owned by a man named Robert Boyd. We are not going to talk much about him, unfortunately, because he gets bought out really quickly by the person that's going to be really the first settler of this region and easily the most powerful person in the region, a man named James Ewing. And you see his property there. He has a huge amount of property here, upwards of 2,000 acres. He calls the first of his property Mill Mount. He goes by the name Squire James Ewing, and they called him that because he owned so much land that for a Scots Irishman who came from a tradition of owning no land was pretty remarkable. So this is the original land warrant from the 1780s. It's what we are going to build a lot of our research off in this period and in this project. You're going to get to be really familiar with this land warrant as time goes on because land tells the story of Robinson Run. But as I said, this is a study from 1760 in the French and Indian War all the way to the year 1800 at the close of the Whiskey Rebellion, and really when this area stops being a frontier. Now, this is a really kind of technical video. I appreciate you watching it, but like I said, I want you to see the tools that historians use to institute a history of any kind, but certainly a micro history. So stay tuned for future episodes. I really am very grateful for you supporting my research and this research project. Every view on this helps. It'll help fund it. It'll help keep it afloat. So please share it with anyone that you can. And we will see you next time on Robinson Run.